The wind screamed like it wanted to skin them alive. Jack McKinley leaned into the blizzard, every inch of him soaked, frozen, and losing feeling fast. His gloves were stiff with ice. His boots soaked through the tout temps ago felt like lead weights dragging him through knee-deep snow. The sky had vanished, swallowed by a white wall, and even the sound of the horse had gone muffled under the roar. He looked over his shoulder at the small, canvas-covered wagon, now more snow than wood. Inside, his daughter Maisie was curled beneath every blanket he owned, her tiny face pale and pinched lips, cracked nose red from cold. "Stay awake, baby girl," he muttered, climbing back onto the broken wagon tongue. "Don't you sleep on me." She cracked one eye open, her voice a rasp. "If I close my eyes, maybe the cold won't see us." Jack's throat tightened. He wiped ice from her brow and whispered, "It already sees us, but we ain't gonna let it win." The horse, a tired chestnut gelding, staggered again. Its breath came in sharp bursts, nostrils flaring with steam that froze mid-air. Jack had tried to push them forward after the wheel cracked yesterday, but now the axles were jammed solid with ice and snow. They weren't going anywhere. He stood scanning the blank horizon. Just more white, more nothing. And then there, a shape, far off. Gray slumped like bones in the snow. He blinked. His eyes were raw and tearing, but the shape remained. A house. "Maisie," he said, shaking her shoulder gently. "There's something up ahead. Stay with me." She stirred, eyes bleary. "Is it a town?" "No." He hauled her into his arms. "But it's got a roof. That's more than we got now." They left the wagon behind, half buried like a grave. Jack stumbled through the drifts with Maisie in his arms, 1 foot at a time, his breath hitching with every step. The wind clawed at them. The snow bit hard. Closer now, the shape resolved into a 2-story house. Crooked porch, roof sagging, windows black as shut eyes. The chimney was caked in ice, but it stood. Jack reached the porch steps, kicked at the snow piled against the front door, and tried the knob. It turned. The door creaked open with a low moan, resisting at first, then surrendering. Inside, silence pressed down like another weight. The air reeked of rot dust and old smoke. Floorboards groaned under his boots as he carried Maisie in. One window had shattered long ago, letting snow drift in over the warped floor. An old iron stove squatted in the corner like a forgotten giant. He gently laid Maisie on a sagging couch, then crossed to the stove. "Don't die on me," he muttered, crouching down. The door to the belly was rusted, but opened with a screech. Inside, ash and a few stubborn coals turned white with age. He dug into his coat pocket, 2 matches left. Just 2. No kindling, no dry wood. He eyed the porch rail behind him, splintered wood, but dry. Jack ran outside, tore off a piece of the porch, and returned. His hands shook as he arranged the splinters like a prayer. Then slowly, carefully, he struck the first match. It fizzled, broke. He stared at the last one. Maisie's voice came soft from behind. "Daddy, I'm here." He didn't look back. Couldn't. He struck the second match. A flare. Weak, but alive. Jack cupped it like a fragile secret, eased it toward the splinters they caught. Slowly. Then brighter. A flame. A breath. That night, the house began to remember. Maisie curled beside the stove, wrapped in a quilt. Jack sat beside her, arms around her shoulders, the fire between them ticking as it settled. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, it was quiet. Still cold, but no longer deathly. The house creaked in the rafters. Jack glanced up. You still standing, huh? Maisie leaned her head on his chest. Are we gonna stay here? I don't know yet. He kissed the top of her head. Just long enough to stop running. Jack couldn't sleep. The fire burned low. He wandered the house with a lantern hallway, crooked wallpaper peeling in long curls. Every sound echoed. Upstairs, one room had a bunk with a missing railing and a small carved wooden horse on the shelf. A child's room once. He ran his fingers over the toy. One wheel was gone. He set it back gently, like it belonged. Morning broke slow and blue. The storm had eased, but the world outside was frozen still. He checked the barn half collapsed, but enough space to shelter the horse. The well out back still ran, though he had to break through the ice. As he poured a tin cup of water, he caught himself whispering, "Thanks." To the house. To the man who once lived here. To no one. Maisie was awake when he returned. She looked warmer, brighter. Her cheeks had color. I heard the house talking last night, she said. Jack raised a brow. What did it say? She shrugged. It didn't use words, just sounded glad. He sat beside her, sipping water. Maybe it is. Maybe it just needed someone to listen again. She smiled. He didn't say it out loud, but part of him believed it. That afternoon he went to check the fence line, and that's when he saw it. A shape in the distance, moving, on horseback, slow, deliberate. Jack froze. The rider dismounted at the gate, coat heavy with snow, hat rimmed with frost. The man cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, voice rough but calm. Didn't think I'd ever see smoke from that chimney again. Jack stepped off the porch, one hand near the shotgun inside the door. The man smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. You folks move in. Just passing through, Jack said. Yeah. The man nodded. Ain't that what the last man said, too? Jack stood still on the snow-covered porch, one hand resting just behind the doorframe where the shotgun leaned. The rider at the gate didn't move, save for brushing snow off his shoulders, with a kind of casual certainty that didn't sit right with Jack, not aggressive but not exactly friendly either. You folks move in, the man asked again. Jack's eyes narrowed. Just passing through. The man gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Heard that before. He stepped forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots. Jack didn't move. The man stopped a few feet from the porch. He looked up toward the chimney, where a thin stream of smoke curled into the pale sky. His beard was silver under the frost, his hat brim heavy with melt. Name's Roy Mercer. I run the mail from Dust Creek past this ridge every few days. Jack stayed silent. Roy looked around, then gave a half smile. Didn't think I'd ever see smoke from that chimney again. Jack tilted his head slightly. Why's that? Roy kicked snow off his boot and nodded toward the house. Used to be called the Cold House. Belonged to Samuel Bridger. Fella tried to outlast winter up here after his wife died. Stove gave out on him. They found him in that chair by the fire, frozen stiff with his coat still on. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Something about the man's tone told him this wasn't a warning. It was a kind of reverence. You folks planning to stay? Roy asked. Jack glanced back through the open door. Maisie was sitting near the stove, her cheeks warm and pink now, tracing patterns in the frost on the window. The house had stopped creaking so much in the night. Or maybe he'd just stopped hearing it as a threat. Long enough to breathe again, Jack answered. Roy nodded slowly, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. He placed it gently on the porch. Bit of salt, some dried pork lamp oil, he said. Ain't much, but enough for one more fire. Jack eyed the package but didn't pick it up right away. Roy met his gaze. Don't need thanks. Just don't waste the fire. With that, he tipped his hat and turned back toward his horse. The animal snorted as Roy mounted and gave a low whistle. Jack waited until the man disappeared behind the drifted ridge before exhaling. He picked up the bundle and brought it inside, the warmth wrapping around him like a worn quilt. Maisie looked up from the floor. Who was that mailman? Jack said, setting the bundle on the table. Said this place used to be called the Cold House. Maisie looked toward the stove, which ticked softly as it burned. It's not cold anymore. No, Jack said. Not today. That night, after Maisie drifted to sleep beside the stove, Jack sat alone with the bundle opened in front of him. The pork was dry but edible. The lamp oil would stretch maybe 4 nights if used carefully. The salt would make the last of the beans bearable. He turned his eyes toward the stove again. It still burned steady. Jack stood and walked over to it. The iron had gone from rusted gray to deep black again. Heat radiated from it, slow and sure, like something alive. He reached out, pressing one palm near, not touching, just feeling. Some things don't forget how to burn, he said, a loud voice rough. They just need someone to believe in them again. The words surprised him. They came from somewhere deep, from loss, from hope. From whatever part of him had kept going after his wife died, and the ranch burned, and every promise he'd once made turned to smoke. He sat back down and stared into the flame. Maybe this house wasn't cursed. Maybe it was just tired, forgotten, like him. The next morning he found the first letter. He hadn't been looking for it. He was moving a broken crate in the corner of the hallway when he noticed a loose panel in the wall. Behind it, wrapped in wax paper, was a small bundle tied with twine. Inside, letters. 12 at least. Folded with care, some water-stained, others yellowed with age. He brought them to the table, brushed off the dust, and untied the bundle. The first was dated 1836. The ink had faded in places, but the script was elegant, soft, the kind of handwriting people don't use anymore. My dearest Clara, the snow has come early. The cattle are thin, the wind cruel. But when I see the lamplight in your window, this land feels less empty. Jack read it 3 times. He closed the letter and looked around the room. The shadows felt different now. Not haunted. Not exactly. Just held. Maisie climbed onto the bench beside him and leaned against his arm. Who wrote it? Samuel Bridger. This was his house. He wrote these to his wife. Maisie's eyes widened. Was she here too? She died, Jack said quietly. Long time ago. Maisie was quiet a long moment. Then, so they loved each other even after. Jack nodded. Even after. He folded the letter and placed it back with the others. Maisie watched, the fire eyes soft. Can we write letters too? Jack looked at her. Maybe, he said. One day. The days began to form a rhythm. Fetch wood. Boil water. Patch cracks in the walls using strips from the barn's broken panels. Maisie made up names for the rooms. The fire room. The echo hallway. Her favorite was the little storage closet under the stairs. She claimed it was a secret fort and filled it with bits of broken china and a feather she found by the barn. Jack let her. Anything that gave her joy she could keep. At night, she asked for stories, and Jack would read aloud from the Bridger letters. Samuel's voice was clear even after so many winters. If the snow buries us, dig out. If the cold takes us, light the fire. If the dark swallows the house, keep a candle burning in your heart. Jack didn't always have answers when Maisie asked about the Bridgers. He wasn't sure what happened after Samuel died. He didn't know if anyone else had come through since. But every time he stepped outside, he looked toward the trail, half hoping, half dreading that someone might appear. On the 5th day, someone did. Jack was gathering wood near the barn when he saw the figure in the distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving through the snow with practiced ease, horse trailing behind, loaded with supplies. Maisie spotted him from the window. "Dad," she called. "There's a man." Jack stood shovel in hand and waited. The rider reached the porch, snow crusting his boots, and dismounted with a grunt. Jack stepped forward, cautious. The man looked up, pulled down his scarf, and gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he said. "Name's Edgar Ross. I trap up in the ridge past Elk Hollow. Figured I'd come see if the rumors were true." Jack raised an eyebrow. Rumors that the cold house was breathing again. He looked past Jack toward the smoke drifting lazily from the chimney. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "It really is." Jack didn't lower the shovel until the man had both hands raised and his breath visible in the cold air. "Easy," the stranger said. "Name's Edgar Ross. Been trapping these hills 30 winters. Used to know this place." Jack's eyes scanned him, layered furs, weather-beaten face boots, patched and repatched. The kind of man who'd survived too many cold nights with too little. "You knew Samuel Bridger?" Jack asked. Edgar nodded slowly. "Didn't know him well. We traded sometimes. Jerky for bullets, pelts for salt. Quiet fella. But I knew the look in his eyes." "What look?" "The kind that says winter's settin' in behind the ribs." He gestured toward the house. "Didn't reckon I'd see that chimney smoke again." Jack said nothing. The shovel stayed in his grip a moment longer before he leaned it against the porch rail. "You hungry?" he asked. Edgar smiled faintly. "I don't say no to hot food." Inside, the warmth hit Edgar like a memory. He stood just inside the doorway, breathing deep, eyes sweeping across the stove, the patched walls, the bundles of wood stacked by the hearth. Maisie peeked at him from behind the curtain. Jack nodded to her. "It's all right, he's a guest." The girl stepped out, offering Edgar a tin cup of water with both hands. He accepted it gently, nodding in thanks. "She don't talk much around new folks," Jack said. "That's all right," Edgar replied. "Most of the good ones don't." They sat at the table while Rosie reheated the rabbit stew she'd made the night before. She'd stayed quiet during Edgar's arrival, but now her eyes tracked him carefully, noting every movement. "You traveled far?" she asked. "From the ridge past Elk Hollow. Been setting traps in the narrow valleys. Snow's been rough, but the critters still run." He spooned a mouthful of stew and closed his eyes as if tasting a different time. "I used to bring pelts here," he said, more to himself than anyone. Samuel would trade at the door. "Clara, his wife, used to make a kind of pine tea. Bitter, but good for your lungs." Rosie raised an eyebrow. "Clara's name's still on the hearthbeam." Edgar looked over at the stove and his expression softened. "She hated this place," he said. "Too quiet, too cruel. Samuel built it for her, trying to chase warmth into every crack. I remember once he lit every lamp, every candle, just so she wouldn't feel alone." Maisie listened wide-eyed. "What happened to her blizzard got her," Edgar said gently. "Samuel went out huntin', got caught comin' back. She was gone by the time he made it through the drifts. Folks say he never lit another lamp after that. Just sat by the stove waiting for the dark to take him." Jack stared into his stew spoon, unmoving. "We found some of his letters," he said softly. "They're beautiful." Edgar nodded. He was a man of quiet words, but they had weight. After supper, Edgar helped Jack reinforce the porch beam with a new plank from the barn. His hands were worn but steady, the kind of skill that only comes from fixing things long enough to know when they're beyond saving. Maisie handed nails from her pocket like a tiny foreman. "You've done a lot," Edgar said as he hammered. "Place feels different, less hollow." Jack glanced up at the old man. It just needed fire. Edgar looked toward the house. "Ain't just the fire. It's you. And her." He nodded toward Rosie, who was singing softly to her son near the stove. "That kind of warmth don't come from wood alone." They worked in silence a while longer until the new board was snug and firm. "That'll hold till spring," Edgar muttered. "Maybe longer." Jack sat on the step, stretching his back. "You believe places remember," Edgar hesitated. "Then I do." "Why?" The old trapper stared out at the white hills. His voice was low. "Because I've been in places that felt like someone was still there. Not ghosts, just memory hanging in the wood. A house like that don't die easy. Not if someone's still talking to it." Jack was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. That night after Edgar left, Rosie sat beside Jack while Maisie slept near the stove. "Do you trust him?" she asked. "I trust he's lived out here longer than me," Jack said, "and that he's not lying about this place." Rosie folded her arms. "He carries regret." Jack looked at her. "So do we all." They sat in silence. The fire crackled between them. Rosie finally spoke. "He said Samuel never lit another lamp." "Yeah." She turned her eyes to the ceiling. "I wonder what Clara would think if she could see this now. The house full of voices again. Firelight. Laughter." Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe she can." The next day, the weather turned again. The sky went pewter gray, and the air felt wet and heavy. Snow came down in clumps instead of flakes, thick and lazy, like feathers torn from a dying pillow. Jack worked to reinforce the barn roof, hoping the weight wouldn't take it down. Inside, Maisie and Rosie made flatbread over the stove. The smell of char and flour filled the room. Rosie wiped her hands and stepped outside to check on Jack. She stood on the porch, arms crossed. "You need help?" Jack shook his head. "Just a few more slats." She watched him for a moment. "You know, when I first saw this house, I thought it was a grave." Jack paused. And now he asked. "Now I think it's a lung," she said, breathing again. Jack looked toward the chimney. Smoke drifted upward, steady. "Let's hope it doesn't forget how." That night they read one of Samuel's longer letters by lamplight. "My dearest Clara, tonight I lit every lamp again. The wind is hungry, but I won't let it in. I made tea. I sat by the fire. I spoke your name. It echoed different this time. Maybe this house still remembers your voice." Maisie was already asleep, but Jack's voice was soft when he read the final line. Rosie sat across from him, her face in shadow, eyes glistening. "Maybe this house remembers more than it lets on," she whispered. Jack folded the letter carefully. "Maybe." By dawn, the snow had buried the fence posts again. Jack opened the door to fetch wood and stopped. There were tracks in the snow. Not animal. Booted. Recent. He followed them to the edge of the woods. A rider had passed through, no doubt. But they hadn't come to the door. Jack scanned the trees, heart thudding. Who rides this high and doesn't knock 2 days later? Roy Mercer returned with another delivery. He brought flower matches and a battered leather pouch of coffee. "I'm hearing things down in Dust Creek," Roy said as he handed off the goods. "Word's spreading. Folks say the cold house is warm again." Jack smirked. "It's got a heartbeat now." Roy looked toward the porch. "Well, you might want to be careful." Heartbeats draw attention. What kind of attention? Roy's eyes darkened. The kind that knocks late, or doesn't knock at all. The night came heavy. Wind scraped along the eaves like fingernails, and the house let out a long groan that echoed through the walls. Jack sat at the table staring at the open box of letters with a half-empty mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Rosie had gone to bed early with the baby. Maisie lay on the rug in front of the stove, her head resting on a pillow made of bundled coats, a book tucked beneath her arm. The fire cracked and popped. Shadows danced on the walls. He pulled another letter from the stack, one of the thicker ones, and unfolded it with care. The paper was yellowing, but the ink was sharp, still dark in most places. The handwriting had changed a little from the earlier letters, less fluid, more deliberate. Slower. He began to read aloud quietly, just above a whisper. "My dearest Clara, I lit every lamp in the house, but she still died in the dark." He stopped. The sentence sat in the room like a stone dropped in deep water. Maisie stirred beside the fire. "Why'd you stop, Daddy?" Jack cleared his throat. "I didn't mean to wake you." "I wasn't sleeping," she mumbled, rolling over to face him. Why did he say that? Jack looked at the page again. Because he was grieving. Because he tried to save her and couldn't. Maisie sat up slowly. Her eyes were puffy from sleep, but wide with curiosity. Did he blame himself? Jack let out a breath. Maybe. Maybe that's what this whole house is, his way of trying not to forget. She climbed into the chair across from him and stared at the stack of letters. "Are you going to read them all? I think I have to." He reached for the next one. In the days that followed, the letters became routine. After chores were done, after the baby had fallen asleep, and the stew had simmered low, Jack would read them aloud by lamplight. Rosie listened in silence, her hands often busy mending clothes or darning socks. Maisie sat close to the stove, carving a tiny horse from an old chair leg, with a butter knife, her focus sharp, but her ears always open. Each letter felt like peeling back another layer of the house, another breath in its long, quiet lungs. Some were mundane, Samuel talking about bad hunting days, frozen wells, cracked windows. Others were tender, how Clara's laugh made winter bearable, how he dreamed of warmer lands, even if they never left. And then there were the darker ones. Clara had been sick. Not just cold or tired sick in a way Samuel couldn't name, but felt growing inside her. He mentioned her sleeping more, her refusing food, her long stares out the window. In one letter dated just weeks before the final one, Samuel wrote, "I begged her to let me ride for the doctor in town. She just smiled and said, 'I'd rather die in a home that remembers me than live in a place that doesn't know my name.'" Rosie looked up when Jack read that line. "She chose this place," she said quietly. Jack nodded. She chose to stay, even knowing what was coming. Maisie frowned, but he still lit every lamp. Jack folded the letter gently. "Yeah." He did. On the 5th evening, Jack noticed something strange in the handwriting. The last few letters before Clara died were written slower, shakier, like Samuel's hand had begun to betray him. One in particular was almost hard to read, but the final lines stood out in sharp contrast, like they'd been etched in ink with a fury. "I lit every lamp, Clara, every single one. Still, the dark came in. I'll keep the fire burning till you come home. Jack stared at that last sentence. It felt less like a promise, more like a plea. He flipped the letter over. There in the bottom corner, faint but real, 3 scratched lines, like tallies. He reached for the other letters, checked them all. The last 5 letters had the same marks. A system. A countdown, maybe. Or a ritual. "What are you looking for?" Rosie asked. He explained the marks, laid the letters out in order. Rosie leaned over, tracing one with her finger. Could be days. Or maybe the number of times he tried to relight the fire after she passed. Jack said nothing, but his jaw clenched. It wasn't just grief in those letters. There was desperation, an unraveling. Maisie tilted her head. Did he ever stop writing? Jack tapped the final envelope. This was the last one. He opened it. It was shorter than the rest. To whoever finds our home, this house was built on love, and it will not die unless forgotten. If the snow buries it, dig it out. If the cold claims it, light a fire. Do not let it sleep forever. There is warmth here still waiting for hands that need it. Silence filled the room as Jack folded it back. Rosie whispered, "That's not a goodbye. That's an invitation." Maisie grinned. "So they built it for people like us." Jack smiled. "Maybe they just built it for whoever needed a place to stay." Rosie looked over at the stove. "And you gave it breath again." That night the wind picked up again. Not a storm, but a warning. The baby cried more than usual. Maisie woke twice. Jack couldn't sleep. He sat at the table, a blanket around his shoulders, staring at the fire. Not thinking. Just listening. He swore he heard something. Not words, but the creak of footsteps upstairs. He got up, took the lantern, and walked the hallway. No one was there. Just the quiet rhythm of a house settling. Or maybe remembering. The next morning, as Jack gathered kindling from the edge of the woods, he saw new tracks. Again, booted. Coming down the ridge, looping around the back of the house. No attempt to approach. No sign of where they went next. He called Rosie outside. She studied the tracks, then looked at Jack. "Whoever it is, they know we're here." Maisie came out with a scarf half wrapped around her neck. Was it the mailman? Jack shook his head. "No. Roy rides in from the valley. These tracks came from the other side." Rosie looked toward the trees. "Think it's someone watching." Jack stared into the tree line, jaw clenched. Or someone remembering. That evening, Jack found Maisie sitting cross-legged in the hallway with the letters spread around her like a spiral. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm putting them in order." Jack knelt beside her. "You think they matter? They mattered to him," she said. "So they matter to the house." Jack smiled. "That's a good answer." Maisie pointed to one of the letters. "He wrote this one after she died. But he still said, 'My dearest Clara.'" Jack ran a hand through her hair. Some things don't freeze easy. She looked up at him, her expression more grown than her years. "Do you think people can come back if the place remembers them enough?" He didn't answer right away. But he thought of the warmth in the floorboards, the way the fire had caught again, the way the wind moved through the rafters like a sigh instead of a scream. I think maybe they never leave." Later that night, Rosie lit a lamp and placed it on the windowsill. Not for light, but for memory. And in the dark beyond the trees, a figure stood just out of reach, watching. They did not come forward, but they did not turn away. The trap snapped shut with a metallic crack that cut through the silence like a shout. Jack flinched and reached for the rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes sweeping the tree line. It was the third snare he'd set that morning just past the ridge near a half-frozen creek he hadn't noticed before. The snow was soft here, quieter than it had been in days. The wind held its breath. He moved slowly toward the trap and stopped short. The rabbit was gone. Blood marked the snow. The trap was tripped, the wire bent, but the carcass wasn't there. Something had taken it. He knelt, inspecting the prints. Boot tracks. Fresh. Same depth, same heel drag. Not his. Not Roy's. Whoever was circling the house had gotten bolder. He stood hand tightening on the rifle. As he turned back toward the trail, the wind shifted and he froze. A figure stood 50 yards off, half-shadowed by the trees. Fur hat. Tall frame. Holding something in one hand. Calm. Still. Jack raised the rifle halfway. "I wouldn't," the man called. His voice was rough like gravel over dry wood. "Wind'll pull that shot off course. You'll just waste the bullet." Jack didn't lower the gun. "You've been watching the house." The man stepped closer. Slow. Deliberate. "I was watching the man trying to bring it back." He wore a thick coat, leather gloves, and a silver-buckled belt dulled by years. His beard was wild, streaked with gray and white. He didn't look dangerous, but he didn't look harmless either. "What do you want?" Jack asked. "To talk," the man said, "before someone else comes asking harder questions." Jack didn't move. "And who the hell are you?" The man stopped just close enough to see his eyes clear blue, too tired for malice. "Name's Wayland Finch," he said. "I was Samuel Bridger's partner. Long time ago." Jack blinked. Wayland nodded slowly. "Told you. Not all ghosts wear sheets. They sat in the barn out of the wind." Jack poured a little whiskey into 2 tin cups. Wayland accepted his with a grunt and sipped like it burned all the way down. Maisie and Rosie were inside. Jack had sent them in after he spotted Wayland, told them it was just an old friend of the house. That wasn't a lie, not really. Not yet. Wayland stared out the cracked barn doors toward the house. "I built that porch," he said finally. "The one you patched. Sam and I, 2 green idiots with hammers and too much pride." Jack said nothing. "Clara wanted a place to raise a child," Wayland went on. "A big window for sunlight. A kitchen big enough for 3. I carved her name into the hearth beam while she was still picking curtains." Jack's jaw tightened. "They lost a child," No, Wayland said. "They never had one. Clara miscarried twice. Sam didn't talk about it much, but it changed him. He looked down into his cup. Changed both of us." Jack studied him. "So why are you really here?" Wayland didn't answer right away. Then, without looking up, he said, "Because I know what that house does when it gets cold again." Wayland stayed until sunset. He told stories quietly, sparingly of the early days. Samuel's laughter. Clara's voice soft and stern. The winters that felt survivable, and the spring that never came the year she died. "I came back once," he admitted, "a year after Sam passed, just to see." The place was already cracking, windows busted, stove gutted. He looked Jack square in the eye, but the letters were still there. Jack leaned forward. "You read them, only a few. Felt like stealing. Why didn't you take them?" Wayland shrugged. "Didn't feel right. The house wanted to keep them." They fell into silence again, the kind that doesn't itch or press, just exists. After a while, Wayland stood. "You've done something good here." I can feel it. Place don't groan the same way anymore. Jack watched him saddle up. Are you going to tell anyone? Waylon glanced back. Ain't mine to tell. But people talk. You're not the only one who's seen the smoke. Jack frowned. You think someone's coming? I think something already is. He mounted the horse and pulled his coat tighter. Keep the fire hot. Keep the girl close. And don't let the house go quiet again. Jack nodded. I won't. Waylon gave him one last look, something like gratitude, something like sorrow. Then he rode off into the dusk. That night, Jack told Rosie everything. About Waylon, about what he said, about the porch, the miscarriages, the warnings. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, the baby sleeping against her hip. Her face was unreadable. Do you believe him? She asked. I do. Rosie looked toward the stove. So the house breaks when it's empty, yeah. And we fixed it by living. Jack didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She reached over and took his hand. It's not just the heat, she whispered. It's the sound, the smell of stew, the scratch of wood on the floor. That's what keeps it alive. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then we make sure it stays alive. The next morning, Jack walked the perimeter like usual. Tracks again. Boots. Heavier this time. 2 sets. One came from the woods. The other circled the house. They met at the back porch, then veered away. Whoever they weren't just watching anymore. They were planning. He didn't tell Rosie. Not yet. Instead, he stacked more firewood, reinforced the barn door, and when Roy Mercer arrived that afternoon with his mail satchel and half-frozen beard, Jack didn't wait for him to dismount. You seen strangers? Jack asked. Roy raised an eyebrow. Other than myself, near the ridge. 2 men, boots heavier than yours. Roy chewed the inside of his cheek. There's been talk. What kind talk? That the Bridger land still holds value. Some bastard down in Helena says he has claim on it. Said it's worth something now that it's not a ruin. Jack's chest tightened. They're coming to take it, maybe, Roy said. Or maybe just to sell it to someone who don't care about ghosts. Jack looked back toward the house. I built it back, he said. Roy nodded. That might not matter to men with papers. That night, Jack lit every lamp in the house. He didn't say why. Maisie helped him, carrying matches in her cupped hands, her eyes bright in the flicker. Rosie didn't ask questions. She just made tea and stirred the stew. Her sleeves rolled up, her face flushed from the heat. And the house seemed to hum. Not loud, not eerie, just alive. Jack stood by the window long after they'd gone to sleep, watching the snow fall softly across the porch. And in the distance again, a figure. Not moving, not hiding, just waiting. He didn't move to the door, didn't grab the gun, he just whispered, I see you. The figure didn't flinch, but it also didn't turn away. The sound came just after midnight. Soft at first, so faint it could have been the wind. Jack stirred on the cot beside the stove, eyes fluttering open. For a moment he thought he'd dreamed it. Then it came again. A voice. Not a scream. Not a cry. A song. High and sweet like water trickling through thawed stone. Spanish. Laced with ache and something ancient carried across the snow like a story, too old to remember its beginning. He sat up, heart thudding, straining to hear. Maisie was asleep on the floor, curled in her quilt. Rosie, too, hadn't stirred, still breathing slow, her baby tucked under her arm. The fire had dimmed to coals. Jack stood quietly, grabbed his coat, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind had died. The world was still. The moon hung low, its light blue and ghostly across the drifts. And there she was. A lone figure walking the ridge, swaddled in layers of torn wool and faded cloth. Her boots left staggered prints in the snow. Her arms held something tightly to her chest. Jack felt his hand twitch toward the shotgun, then stopped. The voice was closer now, the song clearer. I followed the song in my chest, and it led me to firelight. That's what she'd say later, once the frost had melted from her eyebrows, once her cracked lips had sipped broth, and her child had cried into the quiet. But in that moment, all Jack heard was the sound of need. He stepped off the porch without a word. Her name was Rosie Navarro. She barely made it to the porch steps before she collapsed. Jack caught her before she hit the ground. Her coat was soaked through. Her hands were blistered, bleeding. Her breath came shallow. The bundle in her arms squirmed, a baby no more than 6 months old, wrapped in a patched blanket that smelled like wet wool and wood smoke. Rosie blinked up at Jack as he carried her inside. "Please," she whispered. "The road. I thought it would be shorter." "Shh," Jack said. "You made it." Rosie didn't speak much the first few hours. She sat close to the stove, cradling her son, letting the heat crawl slowly back into her bones. Rosie pulled off one boot and winced. Her foot was red raw, rimmed with ice burns. Jack fetched warm water. Rosie soaked it without complaint. Maisie sat beside her, curious and quiet. Rosie finally looked at the girl and smiled. "Your father, he's a stubborn man." Maisie nodded seriously. "He fixes things." Rosie chuckled, soft and warm. "Good. That means this place will survive." Over the next few days, Rosie proved she was more than a survivor. She was resourceful, gentle, and fast with her hands. She knew how to stretch beans into soup that tasted like more. She could calm the baby with a rhythm no storm could shake. She found a broken comb and fixed the teeth with twine and a matchstick. She sang softly when she worked half-hummed lullabies in Spanish. Songs about home loss and stars that watched from above no matter where you walked. Maisie followed her like a shadow. Jack watched the way she moved, confident, precise, like someone who had once had a purpose and wasn't ready to let it die. One morning, Rosie stood barefoot on the kitchen rug, her feet still swollen, but less red, now stirring stew over the stove. She looked at Jack without turning. "You're not just keeping this place warm," she said. "You're giving it memory again." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm just trying to keep it from dying." Same thing she said. Places forget how to live when no one loves them. Later that night, after Maisie had gone to bed, Rosie sat on the floor beside the fire, her baby asleep on her chest. Jack offered her a tin cup of tea. She took it with both hands. "You ever lose someone?" she asked. He nodded. "My wife. Pneumonia. 2 winters ago. I lost my parents to fever, and my brother to silence," Rosie said. "He just never came back from the mine." She sipped. "I kept working. Clinic in El Paso. Then the funding dried up. Then the patients did." Jack looked at her. "Why come north?" She shrugged. "Because I had nowhere else to go. And I heard about a ridge where the snow was clean and sometimes people sang." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That a metaphor? No," she said with a small smile. "It was a rumor. But it brought me here." He nodded toward the stove. "This place has a way of finding people who don't know where they're going." She touched the warm stones beside her. then I hope it doesn't let go. The following morning, Rosie was outside before anyone else. She stood barefoot in the snow only for a second, then pressed her hands to the outer wall of the house. Jack found her like that, silent and still. "You okay?" he asked. She turned. "I was listening." "To what?" "To see if the house remembered me yet." He smiled. "And—" She grinned soft. "I think it hummed." By the third day, Rosie had claimed the pantry shelves as her own. She organized the cans, rationed salt, even found 2 onions that had frozen in the root cellar, but were still usable. Maisie helped her grind herbs and dry out wild mint. They moved through the house like it was already theirs. Jack watched them both one afternoon as they danced clumsy and laughing across the kitchen floor to one of Rosie's lullabies. The baby squealed in delight from his basket. The fire crackled, and Jack thought for the first time in years that maybe home wasn't a place you built. Maybe it was a warmth you made with other people. That night the storm returned, fierce and fast. The wind slammed into the shutters like fists. Snow poured in thick sheets. The roof moaned. Jack ran outside to check the barn. The horse was agitated. The supports groaned under the weight. Rosie held the baby tight and paced. "It's worse than last week." "We'll hold," Jack said, trying to believe it. Maisie stood near the stove, clutching her carving of the wooden horse. The fire's dimming. Jack knelt, pulling open the stove door. The wood was wet, the embers low. They were running out of dry kindling. He looked at the box of letters. The thought crossed his mind. But Rosie stopped him. "No." Jack's jaw was tight. "We need heat." Maisie stepped forward, holding something in her hands, the last of her carvings unfinished. The tiny horse. She looked at it, then at Jack. "Use this." He hesitated. Maisie nodded. "It's just wood. The house matters more." Jack took the carving gently and fed it into the fire. The flames caught, fast, alive. Rosie grabbed strips from the broken chair legs, and they burned too. Within minutes, the room filled with warmth again. They all stood around it, Jack, Rosie, Maisie, the baby. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, they hummed. Hours later, when the wind had died down, Rosie sat beside the fire with Maisie curled into her lap. She whispered a new song, not sad, not haunting, hopeful. Jack stood by the window watching snow drift off the roof in lazy curls. He turned back toward the room, toward the laughter and the light. And he understood. This house was no longer just shelter. It was remembering how to love again. The sound of the wind that morning wasn't like the others. It had weight to it, heavier, faster, frantic, like something was tearing through the forest, trying to outrun what was chasing it. Jack stood on the porch coat, already damp from the wet snow that came slanting sideways. His eyes scanned the horizon. The pines bent low under gusts that howled like freight trains. Clouds hung like bruises in the sky. He turned and looked back at the house where Rosie and Maisie were sealing the windows with strips of oilcloth and old nails. Rosie caught his eye through the frost-laced glass. She didn't have to say it. They both knew this storm wasn't like the others. It would break them or burn them. Nothing in between. They worked without speaking much. Jack braced the barn doors with leftover beams. Rosie dragged buckets of water to the pantry just in case the pump froze. Maisie helped haul every last stick of wood into the kitchen corner. Even the baby seemed to know. He cried less, eyes wide and quiet. The temperature dropped faster than it should have. By noon, the windows were white. Snow slapped against them like thrown handfuls of salt. Every draft in the house became a scream. The wind clawed under the eaves, pried at the roof slats. Nails groaned in the beams. Rosie pulled Maisie close. "You okay?" Maisie nodded, trying to smile. "I'm not scared." "You should be," Rosie said gently. "Brave people still get scared." By evening, the fire was struggling. Jack shoved more wood into the stove, sweat on his brow despite the cold pressing in from every seam of the walls. "We need to ration," Rosie said. "It's not going to last at this pace." Jack wiped his hands. "Rationing won't help if the chimney clogs. The draft's fighting me." She looked at him. "What are you saying?" "We need a second source of heat." She stared at him, understanding dawning. "No," she said. Jack reached for the box of letters. Rosie stepped in front of it. "These are history," she said. "They're why this house remembers. And we won't survive if we freeze to death in a house full of memory," Jack snapped. They stared at each other. The wind howled louder, the door frame shuddering. Then Maisie stepped forward, a page in her hands. "Use this one," she said softly. "The one that says, 'I'll keep the fire burning.'" Jack's heart twisted. He took it slowly. The fire needed warmth, but it didn't have to forget. The page burned fast. The words disappeared in seconds, ink curling and lifting like smoke from a chimney. The heat surged, and with it the room seemed to exhale. For a moment it was quiet. Then a crack from the roof. Jack grabbed the lantern. A beam had shifted in the attic. He raced upstairs. Snow dusted the edge of the ceiling. A gap the size of his hand had opened between two planks. Wind funneled through scattering old pine needles and splinters. He wedged a thick quilt into the space and hammered a board over it. It wouldn't last, but it might buy them an hour. When he came back down, Rosie was feeding the baby, with one hand stoking the fire with the other. Maisie sat on the floor, crying quietly into her sleeves. Jack knelt beside her. "Hey," he said. "We're all right." "I know," she whispered. "I'm just tired of trying to be brave." Jack wrapped his arms around her. "Then don't be brave. Just be here. That's enough." Later, while everyone rested, Jack slipped back outside. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet. He staggered to the barn. The doors were intact for now, but snow was piling against the left wall fast. Too fast. He shoveled a path to keep the weight from buckling it, and that's when he saw it. Footprints, half buried, but fresh. Someone had circled the barn. He spun rifle ready but saw no one. Just trees, just wind, just cold. He shouted, "Who's out there? Nothing." But he knew the answer before the echo faded. They weren't alone, and whoever it was waiting for something. He returned to the house, face stinging coat frozen at the collar. Rosie looked up as he bolted the door. "More prints," he said. "Same direction, same boots." She rubbed her eyes. Could it be Waylon? He'd have come to the door. Maisie stood beside the stove, hugging her arms. "They're just watching." "For now," Jack muttered. As the night deepened, the storm reached its teeth. The rafters moaned like dying trees. The front door shook in its frame. The fire coughed and flared. Then, with a low groan, the west window shattered. Glass sprayed the floor. Snow blew in like a scream. Jack grabbed the table and shoved it against the frame. Rosie shoved coats around the edges to seal it. Maisie held the baby and cried. For 10 minutes, they fought wind with cloth snow, with sweat, hope with nails. Then finally, the wind began to ease. just slightly. Jack collapsed against the wall, soaked through lungs burning. Rosie looked at him, eyes wide. We held. He nodded, for now. When the storm broke hours later, the house was quiet. Not just silent. Listening. Jack walked through each room. The floorboards groaned, but not in pain. In memory. He sat at the table, the fire low, and stared at the box of letters. Only 6 remained. Rosie came up behind him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. You did it, she said. No, Jack whispered. We did it. Then the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door. Jack stood, heartbeat hammering. Rosie grabbed Maisie, pulled her back. Jack walked to the door, hand on the knob. The voice outside was calm, cold. Mr. McKinley, we've come about the land. Jack's hand hovered on the doorknob, frozen more by instinct than cold. The knock had been real, sharp, deliberate. The kind of knock that didn't ask it, announced. Rosie stood behind him, baby in one arm, the other curled tightly around Maisie. Her eyes met his, steady but wary. Jack opened the door. The man standing on the other side looked like he belonged in a courtroom, not the woods. Tall, clean-shaven coat, too fine for snow hat, brushed free of every flake. Behind him stood another man, shorter, heavier, with a clipboard and a face like a shovel. Jack McKinley, the man in front asked. That's me. He extended a gloved hand. Marlon Trent. I represent Rydell Land and Trust. We're here regarding property status and claim reconciliation for lot number 2427, formerly known as the Bridger Homestead. Jack didn't shake his hand. This isn't a trust lot. It's my home. Trent smiled like someone who never heard a word he didn't already expect. I'm sure it feels that way. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope, crisp and official-looking. The deed's been in question for years, but with no rightful successor filing through county records, ownership defaulted to the estate's unresolved holdings. I'm here to clear that up. Jack took the paper, unfolded it. Read the lines. The words were neat and cold. Rydell claimed title through back channels, claiming Samuel Bridger's property was abandoned and dormant per Montana's adverse possession clause. I've been living here since October, Jack said. Trent nodded. And that's the only reason this is still a conversation. He gestured toward the house. Look, I can't imagine how hard it's been. Restoring a place like this in winter. That's a hell of a thing. But legally, it's not yours. Not unless we come to terms. Jack's jaw tightened. What kind of terms? Trent smiled again. You stay through March, help us with surveys, keep the structures standing. When the snow thaws, you step aside, we take over, and you get a check with enough zeros to start fresh anywhere else. Jack didn't blink. This place isn't for sale. Trent's smile didn't move, but his eyes hardened. Everything's for sale. They sat around the kitchen table later that night. The storm had passed, but the tension in the room crackled louder than any wind. Rosie read the letter again. They think they can erase everything just because they filed some paperwork. They're not the first, Jack muttered. And they won't be the last. Maisie sat silent, her carving in her lap. What if they take it? They can't, Rosie said sharply, then softer. Not if we don't let them. Jack stared into the stove. He said we had until spring. But I don't trust that man not to send someone sooner. Rosie glanced toward the door. Then we get ready. For what? Jack asked. Rosie met his eyes. to prove this house still breathes. The next morning, they started reinforcing the barn. If someone was going to try and push them out, Jack wanted it tight, strong, unshakable. Rosie boiled down snow to scrub the windows clean. "Let them see what's here," she said. "Let them see what they're trying to bury." Maisie painted the window frames with leftover soot and oil tracing, shapes, stars, trees, a heart. "This way it remembers us," she said. They worked for hours in silence and harmony. Every nail they drove, every board they patched, it was all a refusal. Jack felt it in his bones. This wasn't just resistance. It was declaration. That night, Waylon returned. No knock this time, just the thud of boots on the porch, the swing of the door. Rosie had her hand on the kitchen knife before she saw who it was. "Jesus," she exhaled. "You can't just—" "I know," he said, breath steaming in the air. "But I had to come." Jack stepped into the room. "What's wrong?" Waylon's face was grim. "Rydell's sending men. Surveyors, maybe. But the kind with boots that don't ask." Jack's stomach sank. "When couple days, maybe less." Waylon looked around the room, the firelight, the patched walls, the baby asleep in Rosie's arms. "You've done more than just survive," he said. "You woke it back up." Jack said nothing. Waylon pulled something from his coat. "An old cracked journal, Samuel's," he said. "I found it the last time I came. Been holding on to it." He slid it across the table. Jack opened the first page. The handwriting matched the letters, but it was rawer earlier. The first line hit like thunder. "If they ever come to take what we built, they better be ready to bleed for it." Jack read the journal that night while Rosie slept. He sat by the fire pages, opened the baby's soft breaths in the background. Samuel had known this might happen. Even decades ago, he'd written about men from Helena sniffing around. Talk of timber rights, water claims. Love built these walls he'd written. But if love isn't loud, greed wins by default. Another entry, "They can't take the fire if we never let it die." Jack closed the journal and stared into the embers. Outside, the snow was still falling. But inside, the house was alive. The next day, Rosie helped Jack dig a trench behind the barn. It wasn't for hiding. It was for defending. Maisie carried rocks, stacking them into the wall they were building along the ridge path. "Looks like a fort," she said. "It is," Jack said. "For what? For whatever's coming next." When Roy Mercer came by with a package that afternoon, he looked at the changes with raised eyebrows. "You expecting a war?" "Expecting someone to bring one," Jack replied. Roy didn't ask more, just nodded and handed over a wrapped parcel. "No return address," he said, "but I'd bet my last flask it came from Missoula." Inside was an old photograph. Samuel and Clara Bridger standing on this very porch, smiling, alive. On the back, in ink faded to gray, "Don't let the fire be taken by men who've never lit one." Jack tucked it into the journal. That night, Rosie sang again. Not the lullabies, something older, lower. A song about holding ground. About mothers who stayed when men ran. About fire that ate everything but never itself. Maisie sat beside her, humming the harmony. Jack stood by the window rifle, leaning against the frame. The snow stopped falling just before dawn, and in the cold light of morning, the first truck came crawling up the ridge. The truck crawled up the ridge like a threat made of steel and snow. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. Its tires were thick with chains, its grille wide like a jaw. A second vehicle followed behind, a black SUV, tinted windows, slow and quiet. Jack stood on the porch rifle slung across his chest. Behind him, Rosie moved through the kitchen like muscle memory. She double-checked the baby's blanket, handed Maisie a thermos, then stepped out into the wind with the same calm she used when stirring stew. "Don't talk first," she whispered to Jack. "Make them show their teeth." Jack nodded. The truck groaned to a stop in front of the barn. A man stepped out, broad shoulders, buzz-cut sunglasses that didn't belong in a snowstorm. He didn't say his name, just looked around, slow and judgmental. Behind him, another man emerged from the SUV smaller cleaner, wearing a long brown coat and a badge that read Rydell Site Oversight. His name tag said Hollis. "You must be McKinley," Hollis said, smiling like a snake. "Heard you were tough." "I'm still standing," Jack said. "Can't be that tough out here." Hollis chuckled, nodding like they were old friends. "That's fair. I won't waste your time." He pulled a document from his coat and held it up. "This is a final notice. Rydell Land and Trust has obtained state-verified deed control of the Bridger property, which as of the last known transfer, includes all buildings, natural resources, and immediate surroundings within 2 acres. Jack didn't take it. Hollis lowered it. "What happens next is up to you." Jack crossed his arms. "You're not taking this place." "You're not on paper," Hollis said. "You're a squatter with good intentions. That's all." The wind gusted. Snow lifted from the porch roof and scattered across the yard like ash. Rosie stepped forward. "You think a deed makes this place yours?" Hollis raised an eyebrow. "I think law makes it mine." Jack smiled coldly. "Then maybe the law needs reminding this house remembers." They didn't leave. Instead, Hollis and the enforcer set up camp in the old tool shed by the edge of the ridge. Said they needed to observe the structure's condition. Said it was protocol. Said it wouldn't be long. Jack didn't believe a word of it. For 3 days they stayed, watching, waiting, taking notes. Hollis walked the perimeter with a measuring tape and a voice recorder. The enforcer never spoke, just stood by the fire pit staring at the house like he could punch a hole through it with his thoughts. Rosie didn't flinch. She sang louder. Maisie chalked new patterns on the floorboards. Star suns, what she called fire maps. Even the baby grew quieter, as if he knew that silence could be stronger than screams. On the 4th morning, the stove broke. The iron warped from years of heat and too many storms. The backplate cracked. Smoke leaked into the room. Jack cursed under his breath, shoving coals out with a shovel, waving smoke toward the window. Rosie knelt beside him. "Can we fix it?" "Not easily," he said. "Might be able to weld it shut, but it won't hold long." Rosie's jaw tightened. They waited for this. They knew something would give. Jack stood and slammed the stove door. "We still have heat," he said. "We still have each other." Maisie tugged his sleeve. "We still have the house." He looked at her. She meant it. That night, Jack sat at the table with Samuel's journal open. The last few entries were messy. The handwriting rushed. He read slowly. "March 12th, they offered me money. Said I'd earned rest. But rest without Clara is just silence. March 14th. I heard footsteps last night. They didn't knock. Just stood there, waiting. March 16th. I buried the last letter under the hearth. If they take the walls, maybe the ground will keep the truth." Jack sat up straight. Under the hearth, he moved fast, pulled aside the rug, pried at the floorboard edge with a knife. After 20 minutes, his hands hit something solid, wrapped in wax cloth. He unrolled it. One letter, short, only a few lines. "To the one who stays, you don't have to win. You just have to not give up. That's what makes it home. He looked up. Rosie stood in the doorway. You found it, she said. Jack held up the letter. It was always here. She crossed the room and took his hand. That's our fire, she said. That's what they can't take. The next day, Hollis returned with another letter. This is your last offer, he said. Rydell wants this place for conservation heritage, all the right words. You sign and you walk out with enough money to buy 5 houses like it. Jack read the letter, then tore it in half. You want the house, he asked. Try and take it. Hollis didn't blink. Have it your way. That night they came back, not with lawyers, with men. 3 of them. Flashlights, chainsaws, talking loud, laughing. They're going to cut down the barn first, Rosie whispered, watching through the curtain. Jack loaded the rifle. Then we stopped them. He stepped outside into the snow and fired a single round into the sky. The chainsaws stopped. 3 faces turned. This land's posted, Jack said. One of them grinned. Ain't no signs, Grandpa. Jack pointed to the tree line. There's one. They didn't look. Didn't have to. Rosie stepped out behind him, holding a lantern high. Maisie stood in the doorway, chalk in one hand, fire poker in the other. This house remembers, Jack said again. And it protects its own. The wind picked up. Something moved in the shadows of the trees. Waylon Finch stepped out, shotgun slung casually across his shoulder. Then another figure emerged. Then another. Old neighbors. Forest folks. Men Jack didn't know by name, but who knew him. The kind who never asked questions unless they meant to stay. The kind who watched from a distance. Until now. Hollis's voice broke the silence. This is trespassing. No, Jack said. This is community. The men didn't finish cutting the barn. They didn't even finish their sentence. When faced with a dozen stares that didn't blink, they backed off. One cursed. Another muttered about not being paid enough. They left in the dark. Hollis followed. He didn't look back. But Jack did. He looked at the porch, the firelight spilling through the windows, Maisie sleeping with the baby curled beside her, Rosie stitching a tear in the curtain. He looked at the letters, the journal, the carvings on the window ledge. And he knew. This house had chosen. It wasn't just remembering anymore. It was alive. And it would fight to stay that way. The first thaw didn't announce itself with warmth. It came quietly, ice cracking on the roof at dawn water, running down the kitchen window, in slow tears, the soft drip-drip of snow giving up its hold on the eaves. Maisie noticed it first. She ran to the door, pulled it open, and gasped. There's grass, she whispered. Real grass. Jack stood behind her, blinking into the gray light. The ridge, still wrapped in patches of white, now shimmered with streaks of brown and green. The earth was showing itself again. Tired, sure, but present. Rosie joined them at the doorway. The baby gurgled against her chest, warm and content. She took in the thawing yard, the barn still standing, the porch still scarred from the chainsaws that never touched wood. This place doesn't just survive, she said. It heals. And Jack, tired, weathered shoulders, sore from too many battles, knew she was right. The week that followed was the kind of slow that mattered. They chopped more wood this time in sunlight. Rosie opened the shutters during the day. Maisie helped sweep out the root cellar and scrub the floorboards with vinegar and pine. It didn't smell like survival anymore. It smelled like spring. The stove held strong with Jack's makeshift weld. The fire crackled without urgency. The wind, though still cold at night, no longer came with threats. One morning, Maisie sat carving at the table. "What are you making?" Rosie asked. Maisie held it up. "A bird, its wings stretched wide, so it remembers how to fly." Rosie smiled. It never forgot. Waylon stopped by again, this time with seed packets, a sack of flour, and something wrapped in newspaper. "What's this?" Jack asked. Waylon shrugged. "A piece of your past." Inside the wrapping was a photo, sepia-toned, water-stained, but intact. Jack stared. His grandfather standing beside Samuel Bridger, both covered in sawdust and laughing like they'd just beaten back the world. Jack traced the edge with his thumb. "They built this place," he said. Waylon nodded. "And now you've reminded it how to stand." That night, Jack took the photo and placed it beside the journal, the letters, and Maisie's carvings. Rosie brought out the last of the dried apples. They ate in peace, candles flickering, baby asleep in Rosie's lap, Maisie humming a tune she half remembered from Rosie's lullabies. Jack raised his cup. "To things that last." Rosie added softly, "and to the ones who carry them." In the days that followed, they planted. The soil behind the barn was soft enough to work. They cleared space for onions, potatoes, a row of corn that might not make it, but deserved a chance. Maisie pressed her palms into the dirt. "Feels warm." "Means it's ready," Jack said. He'd never gardened before, but he learned. One seed at a time. At night, Rosie read aloud from the journal. Jack took notes. Maisie copied the words into her own small notebook, spelling out phrases like "root deep" and "stand taller." Then came the letter, hand-delivered by Roy Mercer, who looked uncomfortable even carrying it. "This one's different," he said. "Not from Rydell." Jack opened it. It wasn't legalese. It was personal. A woman named June Rydell, one of the company founder's descendants. She'd seen what happened on the ridge, heard about Jack and Rosie, read about them in a blog someone wrote after driving past their gate and hearing singing through the trees. "I was taught this land belonged to us," she wrote, "but I've come to believe belonging doesn't come from a deed. It comes from presence." She was offering a different path, a community trust. Jack could keep the house. The ridge would stay wild. The history would be protected, not erased. All she asked was a meeting. Jack folded the letter slowly. "She wants to talk." Rosie studied his face. "Are you ready?" He looked around the room. At Maisie tracing chalk across the wall. At the baby asleep in a basket of quilts. At the fire, steady, low, warm. "I think this place is." The meeting happened on the porch. June arrived on foot, dressed for weather, alone. No suits, no briefcase, just boots with scuffed toes and a small bag over her shoulder. She shook Jack's hand, nodded at Rosie, knelt to greet Maisie with genuine warmth. "I heard this ridge used to sing," she said, "but I didn't understand what that meant until now." They talked for an hour, about boundaries, about conservation, about letting the land speak for itself. "I want to do right," June said, "but I don't want to overwrite your story." Jack looked at the barn, the field, the line of trees where footprints still marked the snow. "You don't need to rewrite anything," he said. "Just listen." The agreement was signed a week later. No payments, no ownership transfers, just recognition. The Bridger Ridge homestead would be registered under local historic protection, held by a trust with Jack as its first steward. Rydell would reroute their expansion. And the house, it would stay. It would stay because Jack stayed, because Rosie stayed, because Maisie carved birds from firewood and buried seeds in dirt and believed in warmth when everyone else expected cold. On the first real day of spring, they opened all the windows. The wind that came in didn't howl. It laughed. Maisie danced barefoot in the kitchen. Rosie planted herbs along the front step. Jack rebuilt the porch rail that had broken in the last blizzard. They found a rhythm, not quiet, just honest. Jack sat beside the stove that night, journal in hand, pen steady. He wrote, "The things we carry into spring aren't just what kept us warm. They're what taught us why it matters." He closed the book and stood. Outside, the trees moved gently, no longer bracing against anything, just bending, breathing. It was a warm morning, the kind that didn't announce itself with sunshine but with silence. The kind of quiet that came when even the wind didn't want to interrupt. Jack stood at the edge of the field, fingers hooked in his belt loops, eyes on the sapling they'd planted weeks earlier. It had started to bud, tiny green sparks curled at the tips like cautious hope. Behind him, Rosie's voice drifted through the open window as she hummed to the baby. Maisie's laugh followed, bright and uneven like a stream bouncing off rocks. Jack didn't turn to look. He just smiled and said it softly to the trees, "Names aren't given. They grow from what survives." The ridge had changed. Not in the way cities change or seasons flip. It had softened. The ground no longer crunched but sighed underfoot. Pine needles scattered like confetti. Deer tracks crisscrossed the path from the barn to the pond. And the house had filled in somehow. Where there had been silence, now there were voices. Where there had been cracks, there were carvings. Little drawings Maisie scratched into the beams with her thumbtack, suns, names, flowers, stars. Rosie didn't stop her. "Let her claim it," she'd said. "We've fought for it. Now she gets to mark it." Waylon came by again that week, not with warnings or flour or photos. With paint. 4 cans, half-used labels peeling. Not much, he said. But figured if the house is gonna stand, might as well wear something nice. They started with the porch. Maisie picked a color that wasn't quite red, wasn't quite orange. "It's fire-colored," she declared. Rosie brushed it onto the rail, laughing as the wind caught her hair. Jack painted the window trim. Waylon tackled the barn door. By dusk, the house didn't just look different, it felt claimed. Like a voice finally clearing its throat to say, "I'm here." That night, over stew and bread, Maisie asked the question, "What are we going to call it?" Jack paused mid-bite. Rosie raised her eyebrows. "Call what the house? The ridge, all of it. It should have a name." Jack leaned back in his chair. "It's always just been the homestead." "That's not a name," Maisie insisted. "It's a direction. Like go past the old stump. I mean a real name." Rosie looked at Jack, something playful in her eyes. She's got a point. Jack took a sip of coffee. "Then what would you call it?" Maisie tapped her spoon on the table. "Emberstead." Rosie tilted her head. "That sounds made up." "All names are made up," Maisie said, "but that one's ours." Jack said it out loud. Emberstead. It lingered in the air. Hung there glowing. "That's not bad," he said, and smiled. They carved it into the barn wall the next day. Jack held the chisel. Rosie steadied the board. Maisie traced the outline in chalk first. Emberstead. All caps. All heart. It wasn't just a word. It was a wound stitched closed. The next letter came by mail, this time from the Historical Society. Rosie opened it slowly. "Dear McKinley family." It began. "We are pleased to inform you that pending final inspection, the Bridger homestead, known locally as Emberstead, has been preliminarily approved for full heritage site status. The letter went on to detail Grant's timeline's preservation options. But Rosie stopped reading after that one sentence. Known locally as Emberstead. She folded the letter and handed it to Jack. "Feels real now," she said. He looked at her. It always was. That night they burned the last of the old letters, not in sadness, in ceremony. Jack built the fire outside in a ring of stones. Maisie held the box. Rosie lit the match. They fed the letters to the flames one by one. Let them go, but not forget. Let them become part of the smoke that curled into the dark part of the ash that would feed the soil. Each page lifted into fire with something behind it, voices, names, memories. Samuel, Clara, the ones who stayed, the ones who left, the ones who never got to come back. Jack whispered, "We remember." Rosie added, "We keep it alive." Maisie softly, "We let it grow." Later, after the fire died down, Jack sat alone with the journal. He read one of the last entries again. April 3rd. If this land has anything left to say, let it say it in the hands that hold it, not the mouths that want to sell it. Jack turned to a blank page and wrote, April 17th. The land speaks, the house listens, and the people we carry it forward. In town, folks started referring to the place by name. Roy said it first while ringing up Rosie at the store. "How's life up at Emberstead?" Rosie blinked, then smiled. "Warmer every day." Waylon carved a wooden sign for the path, Emberstead Ridge. He nailed it to the gatepost without asking. No one questioned it. It just was. And slowly, more people came. Not with chainsaws, with shovels. A woman named Caroline brought strawberry starts. A man named Denny came with old fencing supplies. Someone dropped off a bag of seeds and a note that said, "For what you're planting, whatever it is." It became something of a pilgrimage. Not to worship, to witness. What healing looked like when it had a roof and a fire and a name. Rosie started a journal of her own. She called it The Second Fire. She wrote recipes, dreams, notes about the baby's first steps, memories. She wanted Maisie to have written down just in case. Maisie made a map, Emberstead drawn by hand in colored pencil. Trees, trails, the swing behind the barn. She named the chickens, gave the saplings birthdays, made Jack promise never to cut down the oak with her initials in it. He didn't. One afternoon, a girl from the local school came to interview Jack for a project. She asked a lot of questions about survival, about history, about family. But the last one stuck. If you could describe this place in one word, what would it be? Jack didn't speak for a while. Then he looked around. At the painted porch, the repaired roof. At Rosie hanging laundry. At Maisie pushing the baby in a cart made from scrap wood and rope. He answered chosen. They didn't plan the gathering. It just happened. Spring rolled in fully now with bird song and soft rain that came and went like a guest who knew when to leave. The ridge smelled like sap and damp earth, and the house Emberstead held its name in every nail, every step, every room filled with breath. And one morning, as Rosie hung the baby's clean clothes on the line and Jack patched the coop, Waylon pulled up in his truck and said, "You might want to put on a fresh shirt. People are coming." Jack wiped his hands on his jeans. "Coming for what?" Waylon shrugged. "You, I guess." By noon, 3 cars were parked by the bend in the trail. By 2, there were 7. Folding chairs unfolded themselves on the grass. Blankets spread out. A couple of guitars appeared. A basket of bread. a thermos of lemonade, and not a single invitation had been sent. That's how it worked when something became more than a place. Maisie was the first to speak. She climbed the porch railing like a stage and held up her hand to shush the small, curious crowd. "This is Emberstead," she declared. "It was almost gone, but now it's not." Laughter rose, gentle and proud. Rosie stood next, baby in her arms, voice clear. "When I came here, I didn't come to stay. I came to run, but something in these walls told me not to leave." Then Jack stepped forward. He looked at the faces familiar and new, older and younger, and he felt the quiet settle. Not silence. Respect. "I didn't build this place," he said. "I found it broken, frozen, abandoned like some things are when no one thinks they're worth saving." He looked over his shoulder at the house, then at Rosie, then at Maisie, barefoot, chin high. But it was worth saving. Because it saved us, too. That night, when everyone had gone and the porch was quiet again, Jack sat with the journal one last time. He turned to the back page and wrote, "We fought for this place not with fists, but with fire. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that keeps people warm. The kind you pass on when someone else is cold." He closed the book and set it beside the window, where the moonlight could reach it. The next morning, Rosie found Maisie drawing again. "What's that one?" she asked. Maisie smiled. "It's the fire, but big enough for everyone now." She'd drawn it like a sun, but with flames instead of rays, and in the center a circle of people holding hands around a house. Rosie opened the windows. All of them. "Let the world in," she said. Jack stood by the door, looking out at the trail, now packed flat from so many boots. It didn't feel like the edge of the world anymore. It felt like the center of something real. A week later, Jack walked the ridge with Waylon. "Funny how quiet it used to be," Jack said. Waylon nodded. "Back then it was just a place. Now it's a story. And stories don't stay still." "Nope," Waylon said. "They walk, just like we're doing now." They stopped near the sapling Maisie had planted. It had leaves, now real ones, pale green but strong. Jack knelt and tied a small cloth ribbon around the trunk. "What's that for?" Waylon asked. "For memory," Jack said. "So it knows where it came from." Waylon looked down at it. "You think trees remember?" Jack nodded. "I think everything that survives does. Summer found them before they were ready, but in the best way." One morning, the baby took his first step across the porch. One afternoon, Rosie planted wildflowers in the path to the barn. One evening, Maisie caught fireflies in her palms and whispered names to each of them. Jack built a bench beneath the oak tree. No nails, just balance. He sat there some nights watching the stars blink into being, feeling how nothing had been promised, but everything had been earned. The letters stopped coming. Not because the world gave up, but because it had changed its mind. Not all at once, just enough. Someone from the Historical Society sent a thank you card. Someone from town offered to donate books for Maisie's reading. Someone started a blog about homesteads that fought back. Rosie read that last one aloud and laughed. "Fought back," Jack grinned. Not a bad headline. Maisie painted Emberstead in big block letters across a flat stone and set it by the gate. "Now people know where they are," she said. "And where they're going," Rosie added. Jack looked at the stone and nodded. "Yeah," he said, "that too." And slowly, surely, Emberstead became more than one family's shelter. It became a fire passed from hand to hand, person to person. Kids from the local school took field trips to walk the ridge. Artists came to sketch the barn, the windmill, the porch. A woman from back east wrote a piece called The House That Wouldn't Leave. One visitor brought honey, another brought sourdough starter. One man cried, just walking through the door. Jack never asked why. He knew. There were still storms, of course. Late August brought wind that rattled the roof. A pipe froze early that fall, and someone dumped trash on the outer trail and didn't come back to clean it. But every time something cracked or bent, someone was there to hold it up. And every time someone new came, someone else told them the story. Not always the same version, but always the same fire. On the anniversary of the first snow, they held a gathering. Not big, just big enough. Maisie built a small fire pit behind the barn. Rosie cooked stew. Jack lit the lanterns. They stood together in a circle, new friends, old neighbors, the kind of community you don't get from property lines, but from standing shoulder to shoulder when it counts. Jack spoke last. He looked at the house, then at the people, then back at the house. It isn't about what we kept, he said. It's about what we became by keeping it. Later that night, Rosie took Jack's hand while they stood beneath the stars. "You think it's enough?" she asked. He looked at her. At Maisie asleep by the fire. At the baby curled in a sling on her chest. At the house glowing behind them. "More than enough," he said. "It's home." In the end, Emberstead wasn't saved. It saved them. Because the truth at the center of every storm is this: a fire that's shared is a fire that survives. Not because of walls or roofs, but because someone believed it was worth the match, and someone else believed it was worth keeping lit.